הרב מיכאל כץ הינו שליח חב"ד ביוהנסבורג, דרום אפריקה. בשנת 1972 הייתה להוריו יחידות עם הרבי.
My father asked the Rebbe in that Yechidus a few points that he was grappling with at the time. Number one was, it seemed that South Africa was literally going down the tubes, that things didn't look that rosy here for the future. It's, by the way, been the history of South Africa. Ever since 1948, people were asking the Rebbe, should they stay here, should they leave? And in that Yechidus, my father asked that question as well. Perhaps I should preempt it with telling you that when he walked into the Yechidus with my mother, my father was then sort of this dapper English kind of rabbi look. And he also was known for, he had quite a lot of chutzpah. And the Rebbe said to him when he came in with my mother, my mother always describes that the Rebbe half stood for her. He lifted himself up from the chair. She was so impressed with his gentlemanly mannerism that he stood for her. And the Rebbe pointed to the two chairs that were in front of his desk and said, sit. And my father said, they told us outside that we shouldn't sit. So the Rebbe smiled and said, if you don't tell, I won't tell. Yeah. And so they sat. And the one question, of course, was about staying in South Africa, and the Rebbe then said to them that he was aware of all the problems here. And he said, you know, we as Jews know what it means to suffer under a system that makes you into second-class citizens, and we can never condone such a system. He said, however, the job of a rabbi in South Africa, in the community here, is not necessarily to get involved in the politics. He said, you have problems in your community, you have all sorts of issues. He mentioned then drug abuse, that kids were going off the rails, that kids were getting involved in all sorts of things that they shouldn't be, their assimilation, intermarriage. He said, those are the focus of a rabbi. A rabbi in the community should be worried about that. He quoted to my father and my mother then things that were said in the South African Parliament. He said, proudly, we know that the only Jewish representative in the South African Parliament is a Jewish woman. It was the late Helen Suzman, who was the most liberal member of the South African Parliament at the time, and she was very feisty and took up the challenge and challenged the government with their apartheid difficult policies. The Rebbe quoted to my parents something that he said, you know, just the other day she said this in Parliament. He gave a quote of what she had said, and he said, we're proud of the fact that we are represented in that way, because that is the Jewish way. He said, she's a Jewish woman, and the Rebbe smiled and said, I would be happy if she was a little frummer. She wasn't known to be that religious. And he spoke about the government here and the parliament here and various amazing things that my parents were absolutely blown away by the fact that the Rebbe knew these things. And he said to them, you need to stay here, you need to make a difference in your community, you need to be involved in upliftment of all the things Jewish within your community, and this is where you need to stay, and this is where you need to be that role model, and you need to bring up your children, etc. In the end of it, he said to my father, with a wry smile on his face, are you going to listen to me? Are you going to listen to my advice? So my father said, you know, I've been my father was a military chaplain as well as a prison chaplain. He said, I've been in the army, and in the army there's a principle. My father says to the Rebbe, there's a principle that when a soldier comes to a general and he gets an order, he has to listen to the order. And I've come to a general and I've got my orders, I know what I've got to do. And the Rebbe said, it shouldn't be like that. It shouldn't be like that. The Rebbe said, my experience in the military is naval. I was involved with ships. And he said the job of a captain of a ship is that he cannot be the first one off the ship, he's got to be the last one off the ship. He's got to make sure that everybody is taken care of. And that's your job, that's why you got to stay there. And he said, but now I don't want you to do this because I said so. I don't want you to do this because you came to a general and you got an order. That's not how it should be. You should do it out of conviction. Speaking in English, remember, the Rebbe said, out of conviction, and you must do it with love. And that was the way that first Yechidus ended, and my parents were then ushered out of the room. 3 years later, my father returned there with my older sister, and as he walked in, the Rebbe greeted him and then said, "Are you still in Pretoria?" And he said, "Yes." And he said, "Out of conviction?" And my father said, "Yes." And he said, "And with love?" He said, "Yes." And then they began Yechidus number 2.